In the shadow of cathedral spires, and beneath the hum of crowded market squares, medieval medicine existed at the fragile intersection of faith, fear, and fragile human ingenuity. In a world without microscopes, without germ theory, doctors and healers relied on centuries-old traditions, folklore, and a desperate hope to bring comfort and cure. Here in the vignette of a stone cottage outside Norwich, a mother tends her crying child. The boy clutches a wooden toy in his fevered brow. Smoke drifts from a hearth, where herbs simmer in a clay pot. She whispers prayers to saints and murmurs Latin incantations as she applies poultices, not knowing whether her efforts bring healing or prolong suffering. They would inspect urine through a matula, swirling the fluid in clay bowls to assess color, precipitation, and even foam. From this, they believed they could infer an internal imbalance. Each humor corresponded to elements of nature and temperaments of mind. Good health meant maintaining a delicate balance. Illness meant imbalance. This was the heartbeat of medieval medicine, human love confronting human frailty. An Achillea millefolium for wounds, its name recalling Achilles, legendary healer of Greek myth. A single mismeasured root of belladonna could cause delirium. A dose too small of heartsease might bring no relief at all. Willow bark contains salicin, a precursor to modern aspirin. Clove oil numbed toothaches. Honey acted as an antiseptic dressing, even without scientific explanation. Medieval minds learned by trial and error through desperate trial, occasional miracle, and careful observation passed down in manuscripts like Leech Book. Across meadows, gatherers hunted foxglove and feverfew. Hedgerows yielded elder flowers and willow bark. Every plant promised relief, yet few offered surety. Those wealthy enough might pilgrim to shrines dedicated to St. Roch for plague, St. Giles for pain, or St. John of Jerusalem. They would carry holy relics, pieces of bone, cloth, or metal, and press them against wounds. The idea of touching sanctity offered spiritual cure and physical comfort. The four humors, medicine's foundation, procedure, and philosophy, intertwined. A scar left by a blade might seal infection, even if its purpose was misunderstood. Central to medieval medicine was the doctrine of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was often viewed as spiritual trial or divine punishment. Only the church could intervene. Doctors known as physicians trained in universities like Bologna or Paris would begin their diagnosis by examining a patient's pulse, complexion, and bodily discharges. Treatment followed the humoral theory. To cure too much blood, you'd bleed. To remove excess phlegm, you'd induce vomiting or laxatives. To correct bile, you'd alter diet and prescribe teas or spices. The instruments of medicine: cautery, irons to burn tissue, syringes for enemas, cupping vessels were rudimentary, yet they held the weight of hope. Herbs, plants, and potions, earthly remedies. Beyond educated physicians, the real healers were often wise women, herbalists, monks, and midwives, keepers of oral traditions gleaned from nature and passed down through generations. In abbey gardens, monks cultivated salvia for its believed antiseptic properties, rosmarinus for nervous ailments. Imagine a woman kneeling in a shady grove, fingers trembling as she tears scented leaves, knowing that a tiny misjudgment could poison instead of cure. And in many cases, these herbal remedies did work. Prayer, relics, and faith. Medicine of the soul in medieval Europe, medicine and religion were inseparable. In sickness, the faithful would attend Mass, light candles, and pray at holy wells. In monastery infirmaries, monks would tend the sick with humility. They washed bedding, sang hymns, offered food. A nun might anoint sores with consecrated oils or sip sugar-laced water before severe fevers. The belief that God could heal was as strong as any potion. To refuse spiritual comfort was to deny the patient a dimension of care. From the friar who placed a scapular around a plague victim's neck to the confraternity who rushed to bury the dead, faith wove itself in every aspect of medieval healing. They cauterized wounds, removed arrowheads with skill and speed. They performed amputations with boldness. Bloodletting, still rooted in humoral imbalance, was a primal therapy. It led to dizzying green bottles, cost fluctuations aligned with the season, and sometimes people's fortunes. These were men whose scalpels were stained with blood and whose hands shook with adrenaline. The boundary between prayer and medicine was porous, each reinforcing the other. Surgeons, barber-surgeons, and bloodletting peasants carried their sick to holy wells, leaning on faith and hope. In unheard prayers and frightened tears, humanity refused to surrender. These were not centers of advanced medicine, but places of solace. Bread, straw bedding, Christian care. Physicians considered surgery low-status work. For amputations, wound cleaning, setting broken bones, legions of barber-surgeons emerged. Practical men, trained by apprenticeship. Its recipes called for burnt mice for kidney stones, burnt bees for cough, or pigeons in wine for menstrual troubles. In the knowledge carried by herbal manuscripts, in the ache of a poulticed forehead, the soft candlelight of an infirmary medicine in the Middle Ages was not sterile, it was human. Odd as they seem now, they represented an attempt to catalog knowledge for future generations. Others turned to prayer, flagellation, and bizarre charms, a spider crushed in a nutshell, a broken mouse bone on a string. In cathedral infirmaries, monks sharpened needles for bloodletting and honed chants for the dying. In every hearth, in every bed where a mother comforted her fevered child, healing lived. With each dying neighbor, it felt as though heaven had abandoned humankind. They drilled teeth with cords and pulled them by fireside. Its barber-surgeon, pole striped red and white, echoed the sight of blood swirling down the pole during thigh bloodletting. A surgeon pausing to calm a struggling man before the amputation. A hand holding a patient as the moment of pain approached. It wasn't science, but it was courage and humanity on display. Physicians wore strange costumes, waxed leather coats, and beaked masks filled with aromatic herbs to ward off miasma. Monasteries shut their doors. Urban hospitals overflowed. Yet in its theater, there were moments of dignity. Battling the plague. Desperation and devotion when the Black Death struck Europe in 1347. Medieval medicine collapsed under its weight. Some doctors prescribed mercury ointments, or gargled with vinegars and exotic spices like galangal from Asia. Yet even in catastrophe, compassion persisted. Monks like the Brethren of St. Anthony created houses that cared for the infected, not shunning them but healing them. Hospitals and healers, humanity's final bastion. By the 14th century, many medieval towns maintained hospitals. St. Bartholomew's in London, Hotel Dieu in Paris, caring for the indigent, pilgrims, and the sick poor. Enter the Leech Book of Oxford, a medieval how-to guide for ordinary illnesses. And it works sometimes. It's in small towns. Herbalists learned the secret of a calming tea. This environment was far from clinical or modern, but it was human. It was hands guiding hands, love meeting suffering, faith intersecting with flesh. At the heart of medieval towns and countryside villages, medicine was not a sterile science, but an instinct, a ritual, something passed through stories, observations, and quiet hope. There were no laboratories, no charts of anatomy lining the walls, no sterile rooms humming with machines. There were people and pain and the desperate desire to stop it. A mother would sit at her child's bedside, fingers tracing small circles over his burning brow, reciting half-remembered charms against fever. A monk might mix crushed comfrey leaves into a poultice to bind a soldier's wound. A village elder would collect foxglove blooms, careful not to touch them too long, knowing both their poison and their cure. Medicine was woven into the fabric of everyday life, inseparable from birth, sickness, and death. The role of midwives and wise women. Among the most important healers of medieval Europe were the midwives and wise women, women whose skill was earned through experience rather than study. They brought children into the world and did their best to hold death at bay when it tried to claim mother or child. They carried with them knowledge of herbs to ease labor, to stanch bleeding, to quiet a colicky infant's cry. They understood the rhythms of a woman's body, when a fever turned dangerous, when a pulse slowed. In their satchels were bundles of dried herbs, vials of oil, and tiny charms meant to protect against the unseen. They murmured prayers to St. Margaret, patroness of childbirth, and tied scraps of cloth to holy trees. They were both feared and relied upon. And though the church often distrusted women with healing knowledge, labeling them as witches when suspicion darkened, villages would not have survived without them. In places where no doctor ventured, It was the wise woman who set broken bones, treated fevers, and buried the dead. The apothecary's trade. For those with coin or position, the apothecary offered a semblance of order in an otherwise unpredictable world. Shelves lined with jars held strange treasures, dried snakeskins, thistle root, cloth-studded oranges to ward off sickness, and bezoar stones prized for their supposed ability to cure poison. They prepared electuaries, powders, and potions for every ailment. Recipes passed down through generations, prescribed soothing balms made from violet leaves and poppy oil for aching joints, and syrup of figs and senna to ease stubborn bowels. The apothecary's shop was both a place of healing and a theater of the bizarre. A merchant might pay for powdered unicorn horn to protect against plague. A knight might request a salve of bear fat for battle wounds. Some preparations were genuinely effective. Myrrh and wine made excellent wound disinfectants. Honey was an antiseptic long before modern science confirmed it. Others were pure superstition, born of fear and hope. Yet every transaction was an act of belief, in medicine, in magic, in mercy, hospitals, houses of charity, not cure. The medieval hospital was not a hospital in the sense we understand it now. It was a shelter for the sick poor, a hospice for the dying, a way station for weary travelers and orphans. It was a house of God's mercy. At dawn, infirmarians would light candles and prepare thin broths of barley or leeks. Clean linen, if available, was laid over straw mattresses. They anointed the sick with holy oils and placed relics at their bedsides. Simple surgeries performed by barber-surgeons when no other choice remained. Leechings done by candlelight, and always prayers for the soul's peace. If the body could not be saved, the most important medicine was spiritual. Confession, mass, and final rites. The sick were arranged in long communal halls, the air thick with incense, the sound of murmured Latin prayers never far. Physicians were rare within these walls. Care was given by monks, nuns, or volunteers. Still physical remedies were offered, poultices made from herbs gathered in monastery gardens. The Black Death, which swept through Europe between 1347 and 1351, killed an estimated third of the continent's population. It exposed the limits of medieval healing. It was medicine at its most fragile and its most human. Anesthesia was rudimentary. Opium, if one was fortunate. Strong ale or vinegar-soaked cloth, if not. It was a brutal, last-resort procedure. But archaeological evidence shows some patients survived, the bone healing around neat round holes. Battling the invisible. Medieval epidemics, it was imperfect medicine, but it was life-saving. Their medicine was a desperate patchwork of old theories and new superstitions. In battlefields and city alleys alike, they cut away infected flesh, removed arrows, and set shattered bones. Texts preserved by Islamic scholars in places like Baghdad and made their way into European universities, bringing ancient Greek and Roman knowledge with them. Few moments tested medieval medicine like the arrival of pestilence. Doctors wore peculiar garb, waxed cloaks, gloves, and the famous beaked masks stuffed with aromatic herbs to fend off miasma, the bad air thought to spread disease. It is a matter of heart. The courage of plague doctors, nuns, and peasant midwives shaped an enduring ethic of care. They prescribed crushed emerald powder, recommended bathing in vinegar, or advised people to flee the city. Some towns organized public processions of flagellants, bands of penitents who whipped themselves in the streets, hoping to appease divine wrath. The wealthy locked themselves away in countryside manors. The poor prayed, hoping for a cure or a swift death. Yet even in the face of relentless death, healers tended to the sick, burying the dead with prayers and tears. Surgery, blood, and iron. While learned physicians hesitated to soil their hands with surgery, barber-surgeons embraced the grisly necessity. They carried with them saws, scalpels, and cautery irons, heated in flames to seal wounds. The boldest among them attempted trepanation, drilling into the skull to relieve pressure from head wounds or evil spirits. Surgeons learned by watching and doing. They measured success not by perfection, but by whether a man lived another day, whether a woman could walk again. The legacy of medieval medicine, for all its superstition and mistakes, medieval medicine laid the groundwork for future healing. Herbal remedies discovered by medieval healers proved valid centuries later. And in monasteries, a commitment to record-keeping ensured that knowledge, flawed as it was, survived. Perhaps more importantly, medieval medicine offers a lesson not only in science but in empathy. How? In an age when death was a near-constant companion, communities still fought for one another, still hoped against hopeless odds, still prayed and bled and grieved together. It reminds us that medicine is never only a matter of knowledge. As centuries turned, medicine in the Middle Ages began to shift, not because it suddenly became more scientific, but because the people demanded it. Suffering has always been life's most effective teacher, and in those dim candlelit rooms, the sick and the poor forged medicine into something deeply human. Often a single individual might act as doctor, counselor, and priest. They were bound not by certificates, but by the trust of their communities. What they lacked in understanding, they made up for with persistence and care. The physician, the healer, and the monk were not always separate figures. And though superstition still lingered like a low mist, slowly, observation began to matter more. The people quietly trusted in the old ways too. In the hands of wise women and charms hung over doorways and whispered prayers to forgotten saints. A fever was still seen as a divine test. A seizure might be blamed on demonic possession. A shepherd might notice which plants his sickly lambs favored. Dissection of human bodies was forbidden by the Church for much of the Middle Ages, and knowledge of anatomy remained dangerously incomplete. Physicians based treatments on theory, not first-hand observation, but it was a beginning. A kitchen maid might see that a poultice of cabbage leaves cooled an infection. Medicine was everywhere if one paid attention. But in the shadows of these fears, practical remedies persisted. Their shops hung signs adorned with bloodied rags and bowls of leeches. Surgery was painful and crude, but it was sometimes the only chance a person had to survive. Willow bark was brewed to ease pain, a medieval precursor to aspirin. Not all knowledge came from books. Much of it came from watching. Though the Church claimed the authority of God's will in matters of health, the university surgeons, and the rise of medical schools by the 13th century. The first medical schools began to emerge in Europe's great cities, Salerno, Montpellier, and later Oxford and Cambridge. Here, medicine edged closer to becoming a learned discipline. Students studied the works of Hippocrates, Galen, and Avicenna, translated from Arabic and Greek texts. But even in these halls of learning, practical experience was rare. They might diagnose a melancholy imbalance by examining a patient's urine against a colored chart, or recommend abstinence, bloodletting, or a diet of cold, moist foods for an excess of yellow bile. It was not yet modern medicine. The barber-surgeons' toolkit outside the universities, barber-surgeons plied their trade with brutal efficiency. They cut hair, pulled teeth, lanced boils, set bones, and amputated gangrenous limbs. Their tools were forged from iron and bone, saws for amputation, forceps for extractions, cautery irons heated and flamed to stop bleeding. Cleanliness was a relative concept. Rag wiped clean between patients was considered adequate, though infection claimed many lives. Yet amid this harshness there were small victories. Bones set properly, arteries sealed by fire, eyesight saved through careful lancing of cataracts with slender needles. They were not butchers. They were men trying to hold death at bay with what little they had. The Black Death's dark lessons, some doctors fled. Others stayed, recording symptoms with grim precision. Sudden swellings, fevers, blackened flesh. Between 1347 and 1351, waves of plague decimated Europe. It spared no one, peasant or prince. No single event transformed medieval medicine like the Black Death. Faced with unprecedented horror, healers resorted to desperate measures. Though treatments failed, something changed in these years. For the first time, systematic observation mattered. Plague hospitals sprang up, towns imposed quarantines. The link between cleanliness and health, long suspected by midwives and apothecaries, gained new urgency. It was too late for many, but it planted seeds of progress. Out of tragedy grew wisdom. Remedies that worked while much medieval medicine was misguided, many treatments held real merit. Honey was used to dress wounds and stave off infection. Garlic and vinegar served as natural antiseptics. Willow bark eased pain and fevers. Yarrow staunched bleeding. But alongside these were curious and sometimes dangerous concoctions. Powdered pearls for fever. Ground beetles for tumors. Mixtures of earthworm oil for earaches. They kept the dying company as they crossed from one world to the next. Healing was trial and error, sometimes superstition, often hope. They believed healing the body was part of healing the soul. The monastic infirmary. Within monastery walls, medicine found a more organized home. Monks and nuns tended the sick in well-kept infirmaries, guided by herbals and medicinal texts. They grew their own remedies: chamomile for fevers, sage for sore throats, and comfrey for broken bones. Remedies were cataloged, recorded, and passed down. They washed wounds with wine, burned aromatic herbs to purify the air. In an age of indifference to the poor, the monasteries offered dignity. Compassion in the shadows. When all cures failed, as they often did, there was still mercy. A mother sang to her fevered child. A stranger held the hand of a dying pilgrim. A nun pressed a cool cloth to a sweating brow. A wise woman placed a sprig of rosemary beside a plague victim's bed. The greatest medicine in the medieval world wasn't a salve or potion. It was the stubborn belief that no one should die alone. Even as superstition clouded understanding, compassion shone through, and it remains the most enduring legacy of medieval medicine. Certainly there was error and suffering, and much of what was practiced defies modern logic. Epilogue. What the Middle Ages taught us. It's easy to dismiss medieval medicine as ignorant, primitive, or cruel. Barber-surgeons staunched bleeding.
Monks
Copied herbal recipes by flickering light. Because pain asked to be answered. Because the human heart, in every century, cannot help but reach out to help. But within those candlelit rooms, something extraordinary happened. People fought for one another. Mothers guarded their children. Priests anointed the sick. Midwives risked their lives. They did it not for glory, but because life demanded it. Modern medicine was born from these roots, from faith, folklore, error, and courage. And though the tools have changed, the impulse remains the same: to heal, to comfort, to hope.